studios of the Reynolds Journalism Institute at the Missouri School of Journalism. Welcome to Global Journalist. I'm Byron Scott, your host for this week's discussion of world news events by professionals whose job it is to report the facts and analyze the consequences. Back in January, we talked to journalists covering the popular revolutions in Tunisia and in Egypt. Since then, the so-called Arab Spring has spread throughout the region. Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, of course, Libya. The bombings and demonstrations elsewhere temporarily pushed these upheavals that unseated Ben Ali and Hosni Mubarak off the front pages. But the hoped-for reforms are far from complete in either Tunisia or Egypt. And journalists in both countries are finding that old habits of media suppression may be tough to break. In recent days, we've seen TV coverage of demonstrations in Cairo's familiar Tahrir Square. These are not summer reruns. Here to bring us up to date are a couple of the continuing combatants in bringing these free expressions to the region. Sharif Azer, Assistant Secretary General and IFAC's International Freedom of Expression Arabic Information Coordinator for the Egyptian Organization for Human Rights, who is coming to us from Cairo. And also in Cairo, we are joined by Sharif Abdel Kudus, I apologize for the mispronunciation, independent journalist based there. He is a correspondent for the TV radio program Democracy Now! And a frequent contributor to The Nation magazine. And finally, Dr. Ralph Berenger, Associate Professor of Mass Communication at the American University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. Dr. Berenger is also the editor of the Arabian edition of the Global Media Journal and author of 2 books on media behavior in time of crises. Ralph, I'm going to start with you. And in our pre-show conversation, you made the observation that these you soft pedal, as you put it, the term revolutions in terms of Egypt and Tunisia.
Yes, Byron. Well, first of all, good morning. There's a great deal of concern about the use of terms revolution. They seem to be sort of a journalistic term to mean uprising or something of this nature. And to the political scientists, they look at it and they're somewhat skeptical about the term because a revolution means a revolution. And in Cairo, at least, very little has really changed from the perspective that we in the Emirates have of what has taken place there. The revolution, or the uprising, really resulted in Cairo, at least, a form of an old-fashioned banana republic coup d'état. What ended up as a popular movement morphed into a military takeover of most of the functions of government, and there seems to be a growing distrust and a growing unrest about the fact that though the military is still held in very high regard, some of the practices that the military tribunals, for example, trying bloggers and journalists for a variety of crimes like insulting the state and tarnishing the reputation of Egypt abroad and so forth, hasn't changed that much from the days of Mubarak. So we're a little concerned, I think, about using terms like revolution. The folks at the airport who were stamping passports before June 25th are still there stamping passports. The people running most of the institutions are still there. A few of the heads have changed. A few people have gone into retirement. A few are under indictment. But aside from that, there's been very little change.
Let me ask our Egyptian guest to comment on this. Sharif Azer, of course, free expression and human rights are really part of your day-to-day tasks. What is your view of the situation in Cairo?
Ralph said that the problem is that mainly that what now Egypt is under the control of the military council, which is putting us in a situation that like the revolution was meant to be a call for freedom and democracy and human rights. But now Egypt is under control of a military institution, and as we can expect, that a military institution won't be the best entity to absorb or to adopt this kind of movement by the people, and that's what we are suffering from now. The military council now being summoning many journalists and bloggers and activists to interrogation at the military prosecution office. We see them giving orders to newspapers and TV channels not to publish or to air any news about the military or the military council without consulting them. So we are seeing now a new kind of control on freedom of expression, and it's a bit different from what used to happen during the Mubarak, but it's not satisfactory for the demands of the people who went to the streets and they're asking more freedom. So now we are whenever there is some kind of criticism to the military council on TV, especially on the new, there were some new satellite channels that been airing now after the revolution, and they are very outspoken sometimes against the military council or the council of ministries, and they are very the military council is very very controlling, if we can say, on whatever the materials that.
Let me ask Sharif Abdul Qudus, as an independent journalist and who's writing. We see your accounts regularly in the Nation. How have things changed? Are they better or worse than under Mubarak?
Let me first say I'm an independent journalist that writes in English for U.S. publications, and by that very nature, I'm much more protected because I am viewed as less influential in Egypt, and local journalists in Arabic really bear the brunt of the crackdown on the press here. But let's be clear. There's a law in the book since 1956, Law 313, that prohibits any kind of reporting on the military in Egypt that existed throughout the last 50 years in Egypt. And what happened was when the uprising took place and Hosni Mubarak was forced out of office and the Supreme Council came, on the 28th of January is really when the army first came into the streets following the retreat of the police and state security forces. There was no choice but to report on the military. There were tanks in the streets. The military, after taking over on February 11th, part of the daily discourse, there were daily debates over how they were handling the country. So this created a weird situation. I mean, before, it wasn't a matter of them cracking down on you whether you reported on the military critically. You simply couldn't report anything on the military. I mean, if someone came out and said we're changing the uniforms of the soldiers, then you couldn't even report that. There has been obviously some relaxation of that because it's inevitable now that criticism of and debates about the government in charge, which is the military right now, will take place. However, having said that, as Sharif mentioned, they have sought to reinforce the restrictions, issuing a statement a few months ago saying that everything has to go through their Morale Affairs Department, which is effectively a form of censorship. They have jailed a blogger, Michael Nabil, sentenced him to 3 years in a military court for reporting, for being critical of the military. And in just the past few weeks, they have summoned journalists to the military prosecutor for interrogation. One of them, Hussam al-Hamalawi, who was summoned for interrogation, and most recently, Rasha Azab was summoned along with her editor-in-chief for writing about the issue of military trials.
Our viewers, by the way, can...
I think the military, by its very nature, is an undemocratic institution. They're very bad at dealing with the press. And with regards to Ralph's comments about the revolution being a coup d'etat, I would not describe it as that. This certainly was a popular uprising. There is a military junta that is ruling the country right now, but the Egyptian military has been ruling Egypt since 1952, and I think they want to quit governing Egypt and want to go back to its old job of simply ruling it. And I think after the elections, that'll be the real next battle. Will be whether there can be true civilian oversight of the military in Egypt.
I wanted to tell our people who are viewing this show that pictures of some of these protests and photographs of some of these journalists being hauled into court, into Egyptian courts, are being shown at this time. Ralph, is this really a logical and expected development, given recent Egyptian history? Is this was there how about Tunisia?
Well, my interest, of course, is the Middle East, and Tunisia is part of the North Africa Middle East region. But Tunisia might have been a slightly different example, because there did seem to be a triggering effect, in Egypt in Tunisia that sparked the uprising against Ben Ali. Now, the differences between Tunisia and Egypt. Egypt is a huge place. It's 80-some million people, and it's absolutely correct to say that it has been run by the military since 1952, when Mohammed Naguib was selected the first president there, and then he was more or less a puppet for Nasser, and then everybody who has ever been in a presidency has been a military man, and that was part of the problem. That was one of the reasons why in Egypt it was at least sparked the revolution, was the fact that Gamal, the son of Hosni Mubarak, was being groomed, and Gamal was not from the military, so it was obviously it was a test of will. I used to say, in fact, I've written about this, where the real revolutionary in Egypt was Hosni Mubarak. He wanted to change the succession and wanted a civilian in there instead of a military guy, and that just simply couldn't go. In Tunisia, there was almost a different situation in that the Ben Ali family, it was so thoroughly corrupt and so obviously corrupt. And there does seem to be this business when people get into their 80 years, in their 80s, there's a general perception that now they're weak old lions, and it's time to move against them. And I think that's what happened in Tunisia. To some extent, it happened in Egypt. I think it happened in Yemen that way. The Bahrain uprising, which in many cases was far more brutal than the Egyptian uprising, it was brutally put down, and again that had sectarian differences to it, but there's a sense that the old guys have got to go, and Saudi Arabia is headed by a very old guy.
Let me before we go there, Ralph, let me interrupt you, and before we continue this discussion, I want to remind our audience that you can view or listen to this program anytime by downloading our podcasts at globaljournalist.org. You'll also be interested in the articles, online discussions, and other features that are part of the website. You can send us questions or comments if you like, care of Global Journalist Program at gmail.com, or simply look us up on Facebook. I'm going to bring Sharif Azar back in here and ask him to continue our discussion on freedom of the press in the region. are these popular uprisings, or whatever we want to call them, revolts against the old guys, as Ralph has said, going to improve press freedom or free expression in the region or not?
Is there an improvement, you mean, or?
Is there an improvement now, and what is the outlook perhaps for the future?
Well, like the instant improvements, there is not much. Besides some of like as I said before, like there are some new satellite channels, some new newspapers now being introduced to. Before there was no one was allowed for like private satellite channels. There was the law was controlling them, so there is these things, but still the atmosphere in general is not the satisfactory freedom level that was expected after a revolution, and the journalists or even the common people, they were expecting more. Like there was no way that people would see that journalists have been summoned or being bloggers still going to jail. So I think that we still have a lot to do. We have to reform the legislation. We have to, especially like whether the syndicate, the journalist syndicate law, or other related, even the penal code should be also amended to come more in conformity with international standards of human rights and freedom of expression. Also, the leadership even of the institutions like the Egyptian television and radio, like the heads of the syndicate, all these positions should be also to make sure that the ones who are controlling these or occupying these places are fully aware of what happened in the streets, because it's still like even after the revolution, the Egyptian TV is still giving false reports about what's happening. And the last example, the latest example was 2 days ago when there was clashes in the Tahrir Square, and they were all the revolutionists there demanding they were giving solidarity with the families of the martyrs of the revolution, and the Egyptian TV was announcing that they are thugs and they are trying to attack the Ministry of Interior, and they had weapons. And that takes us back even before the 25th of January situation. So we still didn't feel this change. That
let's move to our journalist here, Sharif Abdel Qaddous, dealing with with Western editors as you're trying to tell the story of what's really going on in Egypt now. Do you find that they have high expectations as well? And do you find it's tougher to tell the story than it was back in January?
I'm sorry, that it's tougher what?
Do you find it's tougher to sell the story to your editors than it was back in January when the demonstrations began?
Well, certainly back in January, the whole world had its eyes on Egypt, and I think this is a problem with a lot of the press in general, is that there's a lot of parachute journalism where there's a focus on a story while it's quote unquote hot, and then once the cameras are turned off, that's where actually the real work begins, and it's very important to keep on following a story through. And as Sharif was saying, and Ralph as well, there's a really growing dissatisfaction in Egypt, in Cairo, about where the country is going, about the performance of the ruling Supreme Council, about the performance of the Cabinet of Ministers with regards to human rights, with regards to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, with regards to the structure or lack thereof of the elections coming up. So there are a lot of issues that have to be dealt with. And as you said exactly, state TV here seems like it's incapable of operating without any kind of master. During the uprising and, all under Mubarak, it was basically a party mouthpiece, just parroting party dogma. But during the uprising, it started labeling protesters as inspired by Iran or Israel or Al-Qaeda, some strange nexus of those. And then now we're seeing them just trying to please the military council, so labeling any kind of dissent, labeling them baltageya, which is thugs, which is the catch-all term now of the boogeyman. So there are a long way to go, but I think what I am hopeful about being here in Egypt is that there is certainly a different sense of agency amongst people. There's been a kind of rebirth of civil society getting involved from the grassroots up, which is exactly what is needed. So while the problems are many, I think that in the long term, I think these changes will and can take place.
Sharif Azar, would you agree with that last statement of hope?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's exactly what the impression here still.
And Ralph, what about you? You were starting to put this into a broader perspective a few minutes ago, and I cut you off.
Yeah, Byron, I'm looking right now at the Freedom House map of press freedom 2011. That is on my computer, and I'm looking at that, and I'm seeing, remembering in 2005 when there was a great promise of democracy, of free press. It was on the upswing. And today I look at this map and I see, for those of you familiar, the map covers the world. It's a I can't remember.
Mercator.
It's a projection.
Right.
And the blue area all through the Middle East, which means an unfree press system. And I'm looking at maybe a half of the world right now is under not free press systems. And the most unfree are right through this kind of what I called at one time the arc of turmoil, the Middle East, going into Russia and wrapping around to China and so forth. It's not a very pretty picture. There's only one free press system in the whole entire region, and that often is excluded from consideration because it's Israel. Israel and Cyprus are the only two free press systems in this part of the world.
And there are those who would make exception to that.
You ask me, am I optimistic? I think that it would be bucking the trend, to see a press system suddenly become free in the Middle East. I'd love it if it were to be so. But it just seems that it's trending right now more towards not free systems globally and through this Middle East than before. In previous studies, Kuwait, Lebanon, and to some extent Bahrain were on the verge of developing free systems. They were partly free. And today, nope, they're solidly in the not free camp.
All of this sort of echoes to me, some of these things echoes to me in those Halcyon days after the fall of the wall, where the nations were suddenly awash with a new generation of journalists, lots of new publications, lots of new radio and TV stations, but the process of change is slow. And Sharif, you mentioned the high expectations, and I think that's something that particularly here in the United States we expect. We expect people that governments can just snap their fingers and have social change. Sharif Abdul Qudus, give us an insight. What's coming up in the next few weeks with news from your region?
Well, in Cairo, as many of you know, the listeners know, there was a mass demonstration, clashes between thousands of protesters and Central Security Forces in Tahrir Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, which resulted in 1,000 people injured. This is really the culmination of growing dissatisfaction, especially with regards to senior National Democratic Party figures from the Mubarak era not being held accountable for the killing of protesters during the uprising. Nearly 1,000 protesters were killed in the 18-day uprising. The trial of the Interior Minister, Habib al-Adli, a much reviled figure, was postponed for a second time. The trial of 2 police officers accused in the killing of Khalid Saeed, who is perhaps the most famous symbol of Egyptian police brutality, was postponed today. The families of martyrs of the revolution have been staging a sit-in at the headquarters of the Radio and Television Union. And that's what is said to have sparked these clashes that happened, that there's conflicting reports, but that the Central Security Forces or police ended up beating and arresting some of them, and that's what sparked these clashes. And now there are, as I speak, there are protesters who have set up tents in Tahrir Square. The April 6th movement has set up a tent there, and they have been calling. There was a call before for a big protest on Friday, July 8th, next week. That protest, I think, will be much bigger now, given the events that took place.
I want to, Sharif, I'm going to have to...
look also to the trial of Mubarak himself and his sons, which is scheduled to begin on August 3rd.
Good. And, of course,
this is... in the run-up to scheduled elections. Who knows whether they'll actually be held in September or not. There's... things keep changing on the ground.
Okay, Sharif, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we're down to our final minute in the show. I'm not sure if you're hearing me.
If there isn't real change on the ground.
We're down to our final minute, and I want to thank our guests, Sharif Azhar from the Egyptian Organization for Human Rights, Sharif Abdul Qudus, independent journalist who we just had to fade out, and Ralph Beringer from the American University in Sharjah near Dubai. Our lead producer for the show is Jessica Popovic. Our director is Travis McMillan, assisted by Andrew Orozco, audio by Pat Akers. Our video producer is Tim Wall. Other Global Journalist producers include David Cawthon, Courtney Flatt, and Liz Lance. This is Byron Scott for Global Journalist, reminding you that you can download, view, or listen to this show, plus additional features, by going to globaljournalist.org. Join us next week as we look at how reporters struggle to report the significant problems leading to the growing world population. Happy 4th of July weekend, everybody.